He knocked several times and got no answer. So he went around the back of the house and found the door open a little. He walked into the kitchen and called for Donna again. There was no answer, and as he stepped through the doorway into the living room he saw why. On the floor was Donna. She had been hit over the head with a large ashtray, it looked like, to him, and was dead. Jim panicked. Everyone in town knew about what was going on between him and Donna, and he was sure that they would think that he had killed her. Like a panicked person, he turned around and ran out of the home. When he got back to his brother's house, he sat in the car for a few minutes. What was he to do? His brother was a cop and he would find out about Donna soon. He should tell him about her, but he was afraid that no one would believe him. He walked into the home trying to act like everything was normal and smiled at Carla as he went into the kitchen. Carla had been busy making dinner and asked Jim to set the table for her. He did it, but was feeling like a robot. He was worried sick and was sure that any minute his brother would be there to arrest him. Just then they heard the sound of Barry's car come into the driveway, and when Barry came into the house he had nothing special to say. Jim breathed a sigh of relief. It meant that he knew nothing of what had happened as of yet. Jim tried his best to act normal, but Barry asked him, "Is there something wrong?" For a moment Jim thought about telling his brother, but just then his brother got a call. There had been a murder at 1650 Water Street and he was needed there right away. Barry knew that was Donna's house and looked at his brother, who looked worried but not really surprised by the news. "Jim, you need to tell me what happened. Did you see her? Did you kill her or something?" he demanded. "No, I did not kill her. She called me and I did go over to her house, but she was dead when I got there. I just didn't know what to do," Jim told them. Barry looked at his brother and knew that he did not kill her. He just told him, "I will be back and it is in your best interest to talk to the police on your own. Don't wait for them to look for you. Water St is a busy street and there is a good chance that someone saw you at the house." With that, Barry left the house to help with the investigation of the murder of Donna Tatro. As Barry went into the home that he had been in so many times, he found Donna's new boyfriend Blake Tanner sitting in the kitchen at the table. He seemed to be genuinely upset. He had gone by the house about 2 hours ago and had decided not to stop because he had seen Jim's car in the driveway. She had told him that she was going to tell him that everything was going to be all right. She was going with me and that she was glad that he had found someone himself. Now Barry knew that his brother was in trouble. The police sergeant looked over at Barry and told him that he could not work on the case at that time. "You are too close to the people involved and we are going to need to talk to your brother." "I am very sorry about this," he told him. "I will have Barry go to the police station and talk to you," Barry promised them. He thought about the friend that he had made while he and Carla had been on the cruise and almost called him. Barry would regret not doing that because within the next 24 hours the life of his brother Jim would change. By the time that Jim came to the police station he was a nervous wreck. He was brought into an interrogation room where he was questioned for hours. At the end of the questions Jim found himself charged with the murder of Donna, the girl that he had at one time thought about getting married to. He could not believe what had happened and he needed a lawyer. Barry got the call from Jim at just after 8. He had his friend Perry's number and hated to call him, but he knew that Perry would be leaving his office soon if he had not left yet and he needed to talk to him. Della and Perry had a long day and were just getting ready to leave when they heard the phone ring. Della's first thoughts were to let the phone ring and let the answering service pick it up. But they were still there and you never knew who would be calling. When she answered the phone she was surprised to hear Barry on the other end of the phone. Barry started to tell Della what had happened and she handed the phone right over to Perry. Perry looked at his wife and she put her hand over the receiver. "He says that his brother Jim has been charged with the murder of his ex-girlfriend." and that he needs legal advice. She told him. Perry picked up the phone and talked to Barry for a few minutes. I have a good man out there in Boston by the name of Joseph Milano. I will have him come and speak to Jim right away. In the meantime, you tell Jim not to talk to the police about anything at all until his lawyer gets there. He warned him. Barry knew that what he was about to ask his friend was a huge favor, but this was for his brother. A good lawyer could mean the difference between his brother's freedom or his brother spending the rest of his life in jail. Perry, I know that this is asking a lot of you, but could you please come out here to Massachusetts and defend him? He is my brother and I know that you are the best in the business. Perry thought about it for a minute. Under ordinary circumstances for a friend he would do anything. But, now Della was pregnant and he did not know if it was good for her to travel, and certainly he could not leave her alone while he did a murder investigation. The doctor had said that she had no restrictions on her movements for the next few months, but he wanted to talk to her first. It was then that he thought of an answer. I will tell you this, I have a private investigator by the name of Paul Drake who is one of the best in the business. He works with different agencies all over the country. I will have him call you right away. I will talk to Della and get back to you sometime tonight. Sit tight and do not worry, everything will work out. Perry promised him. As Della hung up the phone, he turned to his wife. She was sitting there at the desk with a very worried expression on her face. What did he say? She asked him. He wants me to come out to his home and represent Jim. I know that it would be the best for him, but I am worried about you, Della. Are you up to a long ride in an airplane? I don't want to leave you here without me for the whole investigation. We both know that it could take quite a while for me to find the real murderer, he told her as he took her hands in his. Perry, I am a big girl and very capable of riding an airplane. I would not leave my friends Barry, Jim and Carla without you representing Jim because of me being pregnant. Everything will be fine. I will call and we can be on the next plane out to Boston tomorrow. She leaned over and gave him a kiss. Anywhere you go, I go. I love you, she whispered in his ear. Perry knew that Della would go if she could. He just wanted to make sure that everything was all right. He smiled at her and said, I will call Paul and ask him to start working on this right away while you call the airlines. And with that, Della picked up the phone and called the airlines while Perry picked up the second phone and called Paul. With just a few calls, Della and Perry found themselves on the way to Boston just 2 weeks after they had come back from their honeymoon. This time it was their friends from the cruise who were in trouble. They had spent a few days with Jim and knew that he was the type of many who did not anger quickly. He felt bad about not being honest with his girlfriend back home, but had promised that he was going to let her know the truth as soon as he got home. Now he was charged with her murder and Perry had to find out who the real murderer was. As they arrived in the city of Boston, they noticed the change in the temperature immediately. It was only in the 60s and Della was glad that she had brought a sweater with her. Perry had his suit coat on, so they were all right, but it was a little chilly. They stopped by and picked up a rent-a-car and headed to the town of Framingham. As they went over the waterfall that Carla had described to Della, they knew that they were close to Carla and Barry's home. Johnson Street was the second street on the left once they crossed the bridge with the waterfall, they had been told. They looked at all the older large homes that adorned the street and the bikes and signs of children. It was an older part of town, but the houses had been kept up. They rounded the top of the street and rounded the curb and pulled into the driveway of the home number 70. Johnson Street. Carla had been watching out of the living room window for her friends to pull up, and she sighed a breath of relief when she heard a car pull into the driveway and saw her friends get out. She went down the stairs and right out to the car to greet them. We thought that you might not get here in time. There is a bail hearing in 2 hours at the courthouse. The courthouse is about 20 minutes from here and Jim really needs you, she told Perry. I am so sorry that we need you right away. I can show you the way to the courthouse and then to a hotel right on Route 9. It is close to the courthouse and not too far from here. There is a Sheraton where I set you up with reservations if that is all right by you, she offered as she got into the car and told them how to get to the courthouse. Della smiled at her friend. That will be fine. Don't worry, we will take care of everything for you. Perry asked her, did my lawyer friend show up? He asked. Oh yes, he came right over to the police station and arranged for the bail hearing. He seems to be a very nice man. Thank you so much. We don't know what we would have done without you too. It is good to see you too, Carla told them. The courthouse was about 5 miles from Carla and Barry's home and they were able to find parking and go right into the courthouse. The case was not to be heard for another half an hour, so Della and Perry were shown to the room where they were holding Jim. Perry's friend was already there, and when he saw his old friend and his new wife he smiled and offered them the best of wishes. Joe Milano was an older man in his early 50s with a good reputation and heart. He was glad that his friend had come out to help with the defense of this young man. The prosecutor was sure that he had the right man and wanted to talk nothing about bail. Perry took a seat and talked to Jim. Jim told him the whole story once again and Perry listened intently. I will get you out of jail on bail, of that I am sure. I already have a man looking into the murder and as soon as I find anything out I will let you know. Della had filled out the papers for the court requesting permission for Perry to practice law on this one case in Massachusetts. It was just a formality. But a formality that had to be done to cover any courthouse procedures. As soon as the hearing was over he would submit the request to the court. And the answer should be given within the next day or two. The bail hearing went as they go in California, and when Jim came up with the $100,000 bail that the court was requesting, he would get out on bail. Jim's parents were there to post bail and he was out within the next 2 hours. It was then that Perry and Della went to work. They first stopped at the hotel that their friends had set them up at and then they pulled out their computers. So far there were several people who could have wanted Donna dead and they needed to look into them. Paul should be calling soon and then they would be on their way to another mystery solving. Paul was now in California with his friend again in the East. He had spoken to his contact Bob in Boston and he had promised that he would look into the murder investigation immediately. But, Paul liked to do his work himself. He paced back and forth across the bedroom floor thinking. Sue called him down to breakfast and he thought about what he could do. As the family sat down to breakfast he approached the subject. I was thinking of going to Massachusetts and help Perry out. I don't want to leave you alone though. What if you came with me, Sue, for a couple of weeks? We could leave Paul with my parents. They would love to have him and would take him to school, I am sure. Sue thought about it. She knew that Paul wanted to go and be with his friend and she thought about missing Della. Once again he would be gone for a while and she would miss him terribly. I will call your mother and check with the doctor, and if everything is all right I think that this time I will go with you. Sue told him. Do you mind staying with Grandma and Grandpa? Paul asked his son. No, I love it when we go there. They let me play computer games all the time. Paul Jr. told them. Sue called the doctor and got the okay and then called Della and asked her to get them a room at the same hotel. Paul and Sue were on their way to Framingham that afternoon. They were to reach Logan Airport in Boston at 9 o'clock their time. Della had been busy all day looking into the case. She had filled out all of the briefs and Perry had appeared in front of a judge. He now was a licensed attorney in Massachusetts and Perry was all set to practice law. Of course he would work alongside his friend Joe Milano and together they would make a good team. lights made the colors on the trees strange. If they had time before they went home they should take the time to go on a trip to look at the foliage, but for now they had a murder investigation and they were concentrating on that. Nothing happened until a little after 10 when Jim stopped by. Missy opened the door and let him right in. He stayed for about an hour and then they watched as he got into his car and left. All was quiet until about 11:30 when Craig Gordon came in. They were very interested on why he would be coming to Missy's room, so Paul went over to the window and listened the best he could. They were arguing. Craig wanted Missy to go back home and leave everything alone. "We have enough trouble without you coming here," he told her. "I am here making sure that Jim is treated right. He is my boyfriend and no one is taking him from me," she shouted at him. As Craig left the room he slammed the door and Paul acted as though he was just a guest at the hotel out for a smoke. Craig didn't seem to even notice him and so he walked past the door and kept walking until he was sure that he was gone. He then went back to his car and took a seat next to his friend. He told him what was said and Perry shook his head to acknowledge. The two men stayed in the car until way past midnight and decided to head back to the hotel. Meanwhile Della and Sue had studied all the online sites that Donna and Craig's girlfriend had been on and what they had been up to for the past few weeks. She also looked into the girl Nancy, the girl that they had talked to at Cumberland Farms. It was good to be back at work even though she was now on the other side of the country. Sue knew her job and was good at looking into the things that had been going on here in Framingham for the past few months. They were still busy reading when the two men came back from their stakeout. It was not that bad for them after all, it was only 9:30 California time. So they all sat down and went over their notes. So far there were 4 people that they were checking out. Paul was going to go over bank and credit reports on everyone in the morning. So far they had no real idea who was the murderer, but tomorrow they would talk to the people at the small shopping center down the street. Also there was a large Methodist church just down the street with a service at 10. That was where they might be able to get more information. They would attend church the next morning and talk to the minister and the people who were there that were willing to talk to them. As they approached the church they were impressed. The church was a large church with natural woodwork throughout. The building was not very old and there was a large congregation. They enjoyed the services and then went to meet the minister. The people were interested in the strange people who had come to their church that day. When they found out that it was the famous Perry Mason and Paul Drake, most of them were more than willing to talk. They had heard that the men were in town and many of the people came to them, not the other way around. The minister told them that there would be more people there for the 11 o'clock service and that he would tell them that they were there if they would like. The 4 of them thanked him for his interest and time. Most of the people were just being a little nosy, but a young man of 13 named Timothy Barnes caught Perry and Paul's interest. It seemed that he had been sick that day and he had been home alone all day. He lived across the street from Donna Tatro and her family. He had seen one other car that day. It had been a green convertible. And it had stayed for about 20 minutes. He had never seen the car before. Paul took out his notebook and wished that Tim had taken down the license plate number. It was then that he remembered the green convertible that Missy had been driving. He asked him if the convertible could have been a Mustang. Tim thought that it could have been, but he was not sure of it. Paul and Perry looked at each other and thought that perhaps they should speak to Missy as soon as they left the church that morning. They hoped that she was not the one that they were looking for. They all liked her. When the 4 friends went to Saxonville to see Carla and Barry, Paul loved the house. It had all kinds of flowers in the front and had a large floral garden in the side yard. The wraparound porch looked nice and drew the attention to the house as a friendly place for a family to live in. Carla told him that she had nothing but good memories here in her home and could not wait for her and Barry to have a child to fill all of the empty rooms. Della and Sue smiled as they thought of the babies that they were both carrying, and Della felt Perry's arms go around her shoulder once again. They were so blessed, but now they had to find out about this green convertible. Perry asked Carla and Barry if they knew anyone that had a green convertible, and they said no. He went on to tell them about who the young man named Tim who lived across the street had seen a car matching that description the day that Donna was murdered. Barry had been keeping a sharp eye on anything that had come through the police station and heard nothing about a green convertible. He called one of his friends at the police station and asked him. He checked the information and verified that they had not heard the rumor. Barry was well aware that Missy had a green convertible and that she had rented the car that day. He hoped that his brother's girlfriend had not gone over to Donna's house and confronted her. They would have to confront her. Just then Missy and Jim pulled up together, and they all knew that this was going to be the time that they would need to talk to her. As Missy and Jim took their seats on the porch, everyone's eyes turned to Missy. Perry looked her directly in the eye and asked her, "Did you see Donna the day that she was murdered? We have a witness that saw you at her house at about the time of the murder." He used his large eyes to let her know that he was not fooling around. Barry and Carla had never seen that look in their friend's eyes and knew that this was how he got the truth from people. Missy looked at Mr. Mason and then down at her lap. "All right, I admit it. I did go there to talk to her. She already had a boyfriend, she did. Not me, Jim. I just wanted to talk to her, but the back door was open and I walked in calling her name. I was about to turn around and go back to my car when I saw her lying there on the floor. She was dead when I got there. I swear she started to cry. Please, Mr. Mason, believe me. I was scared. Here I was at my boyfriend's ex-girlfriend's house and she had been murdered. I panicked and left right away." Perry looked at her and believed what she said. "All right, I believe you, but you should have told me this on your own. Is there anything else that I should know?" he asked. Missy just shook her head no. This put them back to square one, and now they needed to look one more time into their other suspects. Perry was sure that Missy had nothing to do with the murder, but someone had killed Donna and he needed to find out who. Paul was going over to the courthouse to do some digging into the family, and he was waiting to go over the financial records that were on file with Donna and her family. She had a mother, father and 2 brothers also. Donna's funeral was to be the next day and Carla and Barry would be going. Jim wanted to go but was going to speak to Donna's father first. The 4 friends from California headed back to their hotel room and went to work once again. Paul and Sue left together to go work at the courthouse, and Perry went to work on filing different motions. Della worked on the computer and the sites of the suspects once more. The afternoon was a very busy one and Paul and Sue did not show up until after 6 that night. They had some luck at the courthouse. Donna's brother Dan had been in trouble before with the law. He was known as a troublemaker and had been to jail for assault twice. He had been thrown out of the house just 2 weeks before the murder. The police were out looking for him but had not found him. They were going to be at the funeral and they would talk to him then. Perry and Paul wanted to get to him first, so Carla said that she would call her parents and talk to them. She had known them her whole life. Della was glad to see that Carla called her back so soon. Perhaps it was a sign of good luck. It was, and Donna's mother and father and her brother Dan would be there too. They would see them at 8 that evening, and that gave them enough time to go and get something to eat. All along Route 9 there were many places, and so that night they went Chinese. The place looked good and so the 4 of them went out to dinner. Della and Perry were going to be the ones to meet with Donna's parents, and Paul and Sue were going to be going over their notes. Della and Perry picked up Carla and Barry and headed over to Donna's house. They met each of the family members and listened intently to them as Donna's parents told them what they knew. Donna had told them that she wanted to break up with Blake. He was not the one that she wanted to spend her life with. In fact, she had told them that she called Jim to ask him to take her back. She really liked Jim and had been sorry about cheating on him. But he had a girlfriend in Hawaii too, so she had hoped that he would find it in his heart to forgive her. The last time they had seen her alive was at 8 that morning when they had left for work. Dan had nothing to do with the murder. He was at work himself all day. Neil, our younger son, was at school. When we came home, all of our lives were shattered. We have asked everyone if they had seen anyone that day, but most of our neighbors were at work, they told them. It had been a long day and Perry was still at his wits' end on who the murderer was. Each and everyone had checked out. Now Paul was going to watch Nancy, the girl from the store where Donna had worked. The next 2 weeks were spent with many night stakeouts and interviews of many people, and the court date was coming up. There was going to be a hearing in 20 days and there was nothing. Every day they spent time at the courthouse and they studied everything that they could learn on the computer. They had been there for over 2.5 weeks and Sue was going to have to go home. She could not stay away from Paul Jr. much longer. And she needed to go see the doctor. She was now 5 months pregnant and she was going to be seeing the doctor every 3 weeks now. Della was going to need to leave for a short time too. Her appointment was going to be the Monday after Thanksgiving. Perry and Della knew that everyone was going to have to go home for a short time. Perry got the court to change the date of the trial to the Wednesday after Thanksgiving so that Della could be with him during the trial. Each and every day Perry and Della worked feverishly trying to find out who the murderer was. Paul and Perry spent the night almost every night looking for the murderer, but so far had not found the person as of yet. They did have information on one of her co-workers who had been jealous of her and Blake. Also, Gordon's girlfriend was a suspect himself. She had been very angry about the little triangle that they had and had no alibi. The four of them spent hours looking into everyone and nobody seemed to fit. The murderer was out there someplace and they knew it, but the murderer was eluding them. Now the trial was just 10 days away and Sue had already gone home to be with her son. Now it was time for them to go back to LA for Thanksgiving and for Della to go to the doctor's office. Della missed Lori even though they spoke nearly every day. Lori and Della sent each other pictures of their belly and Lori was starting to get quite a belly. She still did not show when she had her clothes on, but when she lifted her shirt to show everyone her belly, the baby was beginning to show. Della did not show yet and she could not wait until she did. The ride back to LA was long and boring and it felt good to touch ground. The three of them took a limo back to their homes just 2 days before the Thanksgiving dinner. Della wanted to have everyone over for dinner and had been honored when Perry's mother and father had agreed to come to their home and celebrate. There would be Della, Perry, Dave, Lori and Mike there for the feast. Della was going to make the traditional dinner with all the fixings and was very excited. The next day Lori came over and she and Della spent the day making pies and fudge together. They would peel the potatoes and the squash. The next day, Della heard the doorbell and went to answer it. She was thrilled Dave and his parents had arrived. She called Perry over their PA system and let him know that his family was there. The dinner was wonderful and everyone was excited about the babies that were on their way. Even though she really did not need to, Lori was now wearing a maternity shirt that had an arrow pointing to her stomach saying baby. The whole day went well and the men went out to the workshop while the women cleaned up after the dinner. That weekend Lori and Della went shopping on Black Friday. There were some good deals out there but the lines at the registers were long. And Della wondered if it was worth the trouble. But she did finish most of her shopping. Perry was so hard to buy for. The man had everything that anyone could want and more, but she finally found a new watch that she thought that he would like. His watch worked twice a day now. Ever since he had dropped it. Della had brought it to the jeweler's, but it was not worth how much it was going to cost to fix it. It was going to be better to buy a new one. Perry thought that his watch was still at the store. Monday came and Perry and Della headed out to the doctor's office. They lay on the table and listened to the baby once again. The heart was good and strong, and the doctor said that the baby was doing well. He saw no problem with Della going back out to Framingham, and the two of them breathed a sense of relief.